The dust cloud on the horizon was small at first, a mere speck against the golden haze of a Wyoming sunset in 1878. Winifred Foster clutched her worn leather satchel tighter, her knuckles whitening as the stagecoach rumbled toward the outskirts of Yosemite. She'd come 1,000 miles to escape her past, only to feel it trailing behind her like a persistent shadow that refused to fade with distance. "Last stop, miss," the driver called as the coach lurched to a halt. "Yosemite, Wyoming territory." Winifred stepped down carefully, her boots touching Wyoming soil for the first time. The town wasn't much a single dirt road lined with weathered buildings, the sound of a piano drifting from the saloon, and the smell of horses and dust heavy in the air. But it represented something precious, a new beginning. "You'll be wanting the Hayward place," the driver said, handing down her trunk. "3 miles north, follow that trail past the creek. Can't miss it." "Thank you," Winifred said softly, adjusting her bonnet to shield her eyes from the setting sun. She'd written ahead to Mr. Hayward about the ranch hand position. His response had been brief, but promising workers were scarce, and he didn't care if she was a woman as long as she could work. The walk was long, and her trunk heavy, but Winifred welcomed the solitude. It gave her time to rehearse the story she'd tell, enough truth to be believable, enough omissions to keep her safe. By the time the ranch house came into view, twilight had fallen, casting long shadows across the rolling grassland. The Double H Ranch was larger than she'd expected. A sprawling main house stood proudly on a gentle rise, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Lamplight glowed warmly from the windows, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. Taking a deep breath, Winifred approached the front door and knocked firmly. She waited, counting heartbeats until the door swung open, revealing a man silhouetted against the golden light. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took her in with a single glance. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, with the slightest hint of a drawl. "Mr. Hayward." Winifred straightened her spine. "I'm Winifred Foster. We corresponded about the ranch hand position." A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he schooled his expression. "Miss Foster, wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. The stage arrived early." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show her exhaustion. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped back. "Come in. You must be tired." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable: polished wood floors, sturdy furniture, and a large stone fireplace that dominated the main room. The smell of coffee and something savory hung in the air. "Victor Hayward," he said, offering his hand. "Owner of the Double H." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused from years of work. Winifred noticed a distinct absence of a wedding ring, though she quickly chastised herself for looking. "Have you eaten?" he asked, gesturing toward the kitchen. "No, sir, but I don't want to impose." "Nonsense. Maria's stew is still warm." He moved toward the back of the house, clearly expecting her to follow. "You can tell me about your experience while we eat." The kitchen was warm and inviting. An older Mexican woman, Maria, Winifred presumed, smiled kindly as Victor introduced them. "This is our new hand," he explained. "Miss Foster will be staying in the bunkhouse." Maria's eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing as she ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before Winifred. "Eat," she encouraged. "You are too thin." Victor sat across from her, watching as she took her first tentative bite. The stew was rich and flavorful, better than anything she'd eaten in months. "So," he began, pouring them both coffee, "your letter mentioned experience with horses and cattle." Winifred nodded, carefully swallowing before responding. "My father had a small farm in Missouri. I've broken horses, helped with calving, and managed the books." And what brings you all the way to Wyoming territory?" His tone was casual, but his eyes were shrewd. She'd prepared for this question. "After my parents passed, there wasn't much left for me there. I heard Wyoming was more progressive when it comes to women making their own way." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. Wyoming had indeed granted women the right to vote, the first territory to do so, but that wasn't her primary reason for choosing it. Victor studied her for a moment longer. "The work is hard, Miss Foster. Sunrise to sunset, sometimes longer. Weather's harsh, and the men can be harsher." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Hayward." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "And I'm not afraid of hard work." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "We'll see. You can start tomorrow." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Maria will show you to the bunkhouse. There's a small room at the back, used to be for the foreman until we built him a cabin. It's yours now." "Thank you," Winifred said, genuinely grateful for the private space. As she followed Maria across the yard to the bunkhouse, Winifred felt the weight of Victor Hayward's gaze on her back. She'd passed the first test, but instinct told her the hardest was yet to come. The bunkhouse was simple but clean. The main room held 6 bunks, currently empty as the ranch hands were still out working. Maria led her to a small room at the back, separated by a solid wooden door. "The men, they are good men," Maria assured her in accented English, "but they have not worked with women before. Be strong, yes." "Yes," Winifred agreed, setting down her trunk. "Thank you for your kindness, Maria." After the older woman left, Winifred closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. She was exhausted, her muscles aching from the journey. Slowly, she unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully in the small space. As she changed for bed, her fingers traced the network of scars that mapped her back and shoulders, raised lines that told a story she wished she could forget. Tomorrow, she would begin again. Tomorrow, these scars would remain hidden, just another secret in a land where everyone seemed to be running from something. Morning came with the sound of roosters and men's voices. Winifred dressed quickly in practical work clothes, sturdy trousers beneath her skirt, a high-collared blouse, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. She'd learned long ago that vanity had no place in farm work. When she emerged from the bunkhouse, the ranch was already alive with activity. Men moved between the barn and corrals, voices calling out instructions and good-natured jests. They fell silent when they spotted her, curiosity and skepticism evident on their faces. Victor stood by the barn door, deep in conversation with an older man whose weathered face spoke of decades under the western sun. He looked up as she approached, nodding in acknowledgement. "Miss Foster, this is Samuel Jenkins, our foreman." He gestured to the older man. "He'll be showing you the ropes today." Samuel's handshake was firm, his assessment frank. "Can you ride, girl?" "Yes, sir." Winifred refused to be intimidated. "Been riding since I could walk." The foreman exchanged a glance with Victor. "We'll start you with the horses then. Need them exercised and groomed before we move the north herd tomorrow." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Winifred worked steadily, exercising one horse after another, brushing them down with careful, practiced strokes. She could feel the men watching, waiting for her to complain or fail, but she kept her head down and her movements efficient. By midday, her hands were raw and her muscles burned with exertion, but a small sense of satisfaction had begun to build. The horses responded well to her gentle but firm handling, and even Samuel had grudgingly nodded his approval when she expertly calmed a skittish mare. "You didn't lie about knowing horses." Victor's voice startled her as she led the last animal back to its stall. He leaned against the barn doorway, arms crossed over his chest, watching her with those penetrating eyes. "No, sir, I didn't." She secured the stall door. "Lying doesn't serve anyone well in the long run." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Wise words. He pushed away from the door frame. "Come on. Time for dinner. You've earned it." The ranch hands ate together in a small mess hall adjacent to the bunkhouse. Conversation stilled momentarily when Winifred entered with Victor, then resumed at a slightly lower volume, punctuated by curious glances. "Men," Victor called, his voice easily carrying across the room. "This is Miss Foster. She's joining our crew. I expect you to treat her with the same respect you'd show any other hand." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the group. Winifred nodded politely, taking the seat Victor indicated near the head of the long table. The food was simple but plentiful: beans, cornbread, and roasted beef. She ate carefully, aware of the eyes upon her. Gradually, the men began to introduce themselves. There was Charlie, barely 20 with a shock of red hair; Diego, Maria's son who managed the horses; Thomas, a former Union soldier with a quiet demeanor; and half a dozen others whose names blurred together in her tired mind. "Where'd you learn to handle horses like that?" Diego asked as he passed her the cornbread. "My father raised quarter horses," she replied. "Not many, but good stock." "Missouri stock, right?" Victor interjected. "Different from our Mustangs, wilder out here." "I've noticed," Winifred said, "but wildness isn't always a bad thing. Just means they've got spirit." Victor held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. "Indeed." He turned to Samuel. "How's the north pasture looking? Ready for the move tomorrow?" As the men discussed the next day's work, Winifred allowed herself to relax slightly. She'd survived her first day, earned a small measure of respect. It was a beginning. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Winifred rose before dawn, worked until dusk, and collapsed into her bed each night with aching muscles and sun-kissed skin. The men gradually accepted her presence, some more readily than others. Diego, in particular, seemed to appreciate her way with the horses, often seeking her opinion on a troublesome colt or an injured mare. Victor remained something of a mystery. He was fair but reserved, watching her work with those assessing eyes, occasionally offering a word of advice or approval. She learned from the others that he'd inherited the ranch 5 years ago when his father died, expanding it from a modest operation to one of the largest in the county. He was respected in town, known for his fair dealings and quiet generosity. What no one mentioned, though Winifred couldn't help but notice, was his solitude. For a man in his early 30s, it seemed unusual that he hadn't taken a wife. Maria clearly managed the household affairs, but there was no mistress of the Double H. Winifred told herself it was mere curiosity that made her wonder about this, nothing more. A week into her employment, Victor found her in the barn, carefully wrapping a sprained fetlock on one of the workhorses. "You have a gentle touch," he observed, stepping into the stall. "Old Jake there doesn't usually take well to strangers." Winifred patted the horse's neck. "Animals know when you respect them. They respond in kind." "Is that so?" He moved closer, helping her secure the bandage. "Wish people were that straightforward." Something in his tone made her look up, catching an unfamiliar vulnerability in his expression before it vanished behind his usual reserve. "Samuel says you've been doing good work," he continued, stepping back. "Says you don't complain even when the jobs are tough. I told you I wasn't afraid of hard work, so you did." He studied her for a moment. "We're moving cattle to the high pasture tomorrow. It's a 2-day ride, camping overnight. You up for that?" The question carried weight beyond the simple task. A cattle drive, even a small one, was a test of endurance and skill. Her inclusion meant Victor was beginning to trust her abilities. Yes, she answered without hesitation. I can manage, he nodded once. Good, we leave at first light. Dawn broke cold and clear the next morning. The ranch hands gathered in the yard, checking saddles and loading provisions. Winifred secured her bedroll behind her saddle, mentally reviewing what she'd packed: a change of clothes, extra socks, her small medical kit. Here, Diego said, handing her a wide-brimmed hat. Better than that bonnet for the trail. Sun gets fierce up in the high country. Thank you. She accepted the hat gratefully, tucking her hair up beneath it. Victor rode up on his black stallion midnight, the animal prancing impatiently beneath him. Everyone ready. Let's move out. The cattle, about 200 head, moved slowly at first, reluctant to leave familiar territory. Winifred took her position on the eastern flank, keeping the stragglers in line. The work was dusty and monotonous, but there was a strange beauty to it: the rhythm of hooves, the calls of the men, the vast blue sky stretching endlessly overhead. By midday, they'd covered nearly 10 miles, following the winding creek that would lead them to the high pasture. When they stopped to water the cattle, Winifred dismounted stiffly, her thighs aching from hours in the saddle. Holding up, Victor appeared beside her, offering a canteen. She accepted it gratefully. Yes, though I might regret it tomorrow. His laugh was unexpected, a rich, warm sound that transformed his face. Honest, at least. Most men would rather die than admit discomfort. I'm not most men, she returned with a small smile. No, he agreed, his eyes lingering on her face. You certainly are not. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of mutual respect. Before either could speak again, Samuel called Victor's attention to a potential problem with the creek crossing ahead. They made camp that evening in a sheltered valley, the cattle settling for the night under the watchful eyes of the night riders. The men built a fire, and Maria's son prepared a simple supper of beans, bacon, and coffee. Winifred ate hungrily, the physical labor having sharpened her appetite. After dinner, most of the men rolled out their bedrolls near the fire. Winifred hesitated, unsure where propriety dictated she should sleep. There's a good spot over by that stand of pines, Victor said quietly, nodding toward a small clearing several yards from the main camp. Private, but within earshot if there's trouble. Thank you. She gathered her bedroll, grateful for his thoughtfulness. The night air was crisp, stars blazing overhead with an intensity she'd never seen back east. Winifred laid out her blankets and sat for a moment, massaging her sore muscles and enjoying the rare moment of solitude. Mind some company. Victor's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing at the edge of the clearing, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. Not at all, she replied, shifting to make room on the fallen log she'd been using as a seat. He handed her one of the cups and settled beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars. You've adjusted well, he finally said. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. Did you hire me expecting me to fail? She asked, not offended but curious. Victor considered this. Not fail exactly, but I thought you might find the reality harsher than the idea. Reality is often harsh, she said softly. That doesn't mean we shouldn't face it. He turned to study her profile in the moonlight. You're running from something. It wasn't a question, and Winifred felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What makes you say that? Experience. Most people don't end up in Wyoming territory by accident. He took a sip of his coffee. Everyone here is running to something or from something, often both. And which are you doing, Mr. Hayward? She met his gaze directly. A half-smile played at his lips. Touché, Miss Foster. He looked back at the stars. Perhaps a bit of both. My father built this ranch from nothing. I'm trying to honor that legacy while making my own path. A worthy goal. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. My father was a farmer, small operation, but he loved the land. Taught me everything he knew. And your mother died when I was 12. Fever took her. This much was true, at least. I'm sorry. His voice softened. My mother passed when I was young as well. Father never remarried, nor did mine. Winifred stared into her cup. He did his best, though. Victor nodded. That's all any of us can do. He finished his coffee and stood. We should get some rest. Early start tomorrow. Good night, Mr. Hayward, he paused, looking down at her. Victor, after a day in the saddle together, I think we can dispense with formalities, at least out here. Then good night, Victor, she amended, and thank you for the coffee. Good night, Winifred. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then nodded once and walked back toward the main camp. Winifred watched him go, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was dangerous, she knew, to feel anything for this man beyond professional respect. Her past made any kind of attachment risky. And yet, as she settled into her bedroll and closed her eyes, it was Victor's face that followed her into dreams. Morning brought mist and the promise of heat. They broke camp efficiently, the cattle already moving restlessly as if sensing their destination was near. The high pasture lay just beyond the next ridge, Victor explained as they rode out, rich with summer grass and protected from the worst of the winter storms. The terrain grew steeper as they climbed, the cattle slowing on the incline. Winifred's mare picked her way carefully among the rocks, responding well to the lightest touch of the reins. Near midday, they crested the final ridge, and the high pasture spread before them, a vast expanse of green nestled between rugged peaks. It's beautiful, Winifred breathed, reining in beside Victor. Best grazing land in the territory. Pride colored his voice. My father claimed this section before anyone else saw its value. The stream never runs dry, even in drought years. They worked together to settle the cattle, ensuring they spread out evenly across the pasture. By late afternoon, the job was complete, and they prepared for the return journey. We'll camp at Bear Creek tonight, Victor announced as they rode out. It's closer than last night's spot. Should put us back at the ranch by midday tomorrow. The ride down was faster without the cattle, allowing for conversation. Winifred found herself riding alongside Victor for much of the afternoon, listening as he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early years on the ranch. That ridge there, he said, indicating a rocky outcropping to the west, is where I shot my first elk. I was 12, thought I was a man already. His smile was wry. Father let me track it alone, though I later learned he followed at a distance, just in case. He sounds like a good father. He was, Victor agreed. Tough but fair, taught me the value of hard work and honest dealings. Important lessons, Winifred nodded. My father was similar, said a person's word was their bond, wise man. Victor studied her profile. He'd be proud of you, I think. The simple statement touched her deeply. I hope so. They made camp earlier that evening, the day's work having been less taxing. After dinner, Winifred helped clean the cooking utensils in the nearby creek, enjoying the cool water on her hands. When she returned to camp, she found most of the men already settling in for the night, exhausted from 2 days on the trail. Victor sat slightly apart, writing in a small leather-bound journal by the light of a lantern. He looked up as she approached. Join me. She settled on the ground nearby, stretching her legs toward the dying fire. Record-keeping, he nodded. Father started the practice. Every drive, every berth, every sail, all recorded. He closed the journal. Helps to know where you've been if you want to plan where you're going. Sound advice for more than just ranching, she observed. Victor set the journal aside. You know, you've surprised me, Winifred. In what way? You work harder than men twice your size. You don't complain. You have a way with the animals that can't be taught." He paused. "And yet, there's something you're not saying." Her heart quickened. "We all have our private thoughts." "True enough." His eyes, dark in the firelight, searched hers. "But sometimes secrets become burdens too heavy to carry alone." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken questions. Winifred looked away first. "Some burdens we choose, others are thrust upon us. Either way, they shape who we become." "Indeed." He reached out, his fingers lightly touching her hand where it rested on her knee, a brief, gentle contact that sent warmth spreading up her arm. "When you're ready to share yours, I'm willing to listen." Before she could respond, a commotion broke out among the horses. Victor was on his feet instantly, moving toward the source of the disturbance. Winifred followed, heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with potential danger. The horses had been spooked by a mountain lion, its shadowy form visible briefly in the trees before it disappeared. Once the animals were calmed and the perimeter checked, the camp settled back into uneasy quiet. "I'll take first watch," Victor told the men. "Get some rest." Winifred returned to her bedroll, but sleep eluded her. Victor's words echoed in her mind. "When you're ready to share yours, I'm willing to listen." The offer was tempting, more tempting than it should have been, in the month since she'd fled St. Louis. She hadn't spoken of what happened to a single soul. The weight of it pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not yet. Perhaps not ever. The journey back to the ranch the next day was quiet, each rider lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the familiar buildings of the Double H, Winifred felt an unexpected sense of homecoming. In just a week, this place had begun to feel more like home than anywhere she'd been since her father's death. The next several weeks passed in a blur of work and gradually warming weather. Spring brought calving season, and Winifred found herself working alongside Victor more often, delivering calves and tending to mothers in distress. His hands were surprisingly gentle with the newborns, his patience seemingly endless during the long nights of watchful waiting. One particularly difficult birth required both of them working together for hours. When the calf finally emerged, healthy but exhausted, Victor's face broke into a rare, unguarded smile of pure joy. It transformed him, erasing the lines of responsibility that usually marked his features, and Winifred couldn't help but smile in return. "We make a good team," he said as they washed up afterward at the pump outside the barn. "We do," she agreed, suddenly acutely aware of his proximity in the pre-dawn stillness. He turned to her, water droplets clinging to his face in the lantern light. For a breathless moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you, Winifred." Not many would have stayed through the night. "I wouldn't have left you to manage alone," she replied, meaning every word. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability quickly masked. "Get some rest. You've earned it." As spring gave way to summer, the work changed but didn't lessen. Fences needed mending, hay needed cutting, and the constant cycle of ranch life continued. Winifred found herself settled into a routine, her skills valued and her presence accepted by even the most skeptical of the hands. What she hadn't expected was her growing awareness of Victor, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, the warmth that spread through her when he praised her work. It was foolish, she knew. Even if her past didn't make any attachment dangerous, the difference in their positions made anything beyond professional respect inappropriate. And yet, she couldn't deny that something was developing between them, conversations that lingered longer than necessary, glances that held meaning beyond mere words, small gestures of consideration that spoke volumes. One hot July afternoon, Victor found her in the barn, inventorying supplies. "Winifred, I need to ride into town. Thought you might like to come along." The invitation was unexpected. "Is something needed?" "New ledger books, supplies for Maria Mail," he shrugged. "Nothing that can't wait if you're busy." "No, I'd like to come." She'd been on the ranch continuously since her arrival, never venturing into Yosemite proper. "Just give me a moment to change." She hurried to her room, quickly swapping her work clothes for her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was still presentable. She pinned up her hair and added a bonnet, conscious of wanting to appear respectable in town. Victor was waiting by the buggy when she returned, his eyebrows rising slightly at her transformation. "You clean up nicely," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "As do you," she replied, noting he'd changed into a clean shirt and brushed his hair. The ride to town was pleasant, the summer air heavy with the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed grass. Victor pointed out landmarks along the way: the old Pearson place, now abandoned, the creek where he'd caught his first trout, the hilltop where town celebrations were held on the 4th of July. Yosemite was larger than Winifred had initially thought, boasting a general store, post office, 2 saloons, a small hotel, and various other businesses along its main street. People nodded respectfully to Victor as they passed, curiosity evident in their glances at Winifred. Their first stop was the general store, a large establishment packed with everything from tools to fabric. The proprietor, a round man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Victor warmly. "Mr. Hayward, good to see you, sir. And who might this lovely lady be?" "George, this is Miss Foster. She works at the Double H." Victor's tone was casual but carried a hint of warning that Winifred didn't miss. "A pleasure, Miss Foster." George's eyes widened slightly at Victor's explanation, but he recovered quickly. "What can I help you with today?" While Victor discussed his orders, Winifred browsed the store, lingering over a display of hair combs and ribbons. It had been so long since she'd indulged in anything feminine. "See something you like?" Victor asked, appearing beside her. "Just looking," she said quickly, moving away from the display. He studied her for a moment. "Wait here, I need to check the mail." When he returned several minutes later, he handed her a small paper package. "For you." "What is it?" she asked, surprised. "Open it and see." Inside was a simple but elegant wooden hair comb, inlaid with small pieces of abalone that caught the light. "Victor, I can't accept this," she protested softly. "Consider it a bonus for all the extra hours you've put in with the calving." His expression was unreadable. Everyone deserves something beautiful now and then. Before she could argue further, he turned to complete his business with George. Winifred held the comb in her palm, emotion tightening her throat. It was a small gesture, but the thoughtfulness behind it touched her deeply. Their next stop was the hotel restaurant for a late lunch. The dining room was nearly empty at that hour, allowing them a quiet table by the window. Winifred felt conspicuous in her faded dress among the crisp white tablecloths and polished silverware, but Victor seemed perfectly at ease. "Order whatever you like," he encouraged. "The beefsteak here is excellent." They enjoyed a leisurely meal, conversation flowing easily between them. Victor shared stories of Yosemite's early days, and Winifred found herself relaxing enough to speak of her childhood in Missouri, the happier parts, at least. As they finished their coffee, a well-dressed woman approached their table, her expression curious. "Victor Hayward, I thought that was you." Her voice was honey-sweet, her smile practiced. "It's been an age since you've graced us with your presence in town." Victor stood politely. "Mrs. Palmer, good to see you. And who is your charming companion, Mrs.?" Palmer's assessing gaze turned to Winifred, taking in her simple dress and sun-browned skin. "This is Miss Foster. She works at the Double H." Again, that simple explanation that somehow managed to convey both truth and warning. "How interesting, Mrs." Palmer's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, I must be going. Do give my regards to Maria. I keep hoping she'll share her enchilada recipe with the ladies' auxiliary." After she departed, Victor sighed. "Mrs. Palmer is the town's primary source of gossip. I apologize if she made you uncomfortable." "No need to apologize," Winifred assured him, though she'd felt the sting of the woman's assessment. "I'm sure it's unusual to see you dining with an employee." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "What's unusual is finding someone who works as hard and cares as much as you do. The rest is no one's business but ours." Their ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the Double H, the setting sun cast long shadows across the land, painting the buildings in gold and amber. "Thank you for today," Winifred said as Victor helped her down from the buggy. "It was nice to see the town." His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "The pleasure was mine." That evening, alone in her room, Winifred removed the wooden comb from its wrapping and gently placed it in her hair, studying her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. The gesture meant more than Victor could possibly know. It had been so long since anyone had given her something simply to bring her joy. She removed the comb carefully before going to bed, placing it in the small wooden box where she kept her few treasures. As she drifted towards sleep, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, a future where she could accept such gifts without fear of future here at the Double H with Victor. The dream shattered with the morning light, reality crashing back with painful clarity. She was hiding, always hiding. And what she was hiding from would never simply disappear, no matter how many miles she put between herself and St. Louis. August brought scorching heat and the beginning of harvest preparations. The hay had to be cut, dried, and stored for winter feeding. It was back-breaking work under the relentless sun, but Winifred welcomed the exhaustion that came with it. It left little energy for dangerous thoughts or memories. One particularly hot afternoon, Victor announced that work would end early. "Rivers running high from the mountain melt," he told the hands. "Good day for a swim before supper." The men whooped with approval, quickly finishing their tasks before heading toward a deep, shaded bend in the creek that ran through the property. Winifred hesitated, unsure if the invitation extended to her. Victor noticed her uncertainty. "There's a sheltered spot around the bend," he said quietly. "Private if you'd like to cool off." The thought of cold water against her overheated skin was too tempting to resist. Winifred nodded gratefully and headed to her room to change into an old dress that wouldn't be ruined by the water. The spot Victor had mentioned was perfect, a small, tree-shaded pool separated from the main swimming hole by a curve in the creek and a stand of willows. Winifred could hear the distant shouts and splashes of the men but felt completely private. She removed her boots and stockings, then waded into the cool water, sighing with relief as it lapped around her calves. After checking that she was truly alone, she unfastened the top buttons of her dress, allowing the breeze to cool her neck and collarbone. The sound of a twig snapping made her whirl around. Victor stood at the edge of the trees, holding a towel. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, averting his eyes. "I thought you might need this. I should have called out." "It's all right," Winifred said, quickly refastening her buttons even though she was modestly covered. "Thank you for the towel." He stepped forward to hand it to her, then made as if to leave. "You don't have to go," she heard herself say. "It's your land, after all." Victor hesitated. "I don't want to intrude on your privacy." "You're not intruding." She wasn't sure what prompted her boldness, perhaps the heat, or the weeks of growing closeness between them, or simply the need for connection after so many months of isolation. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Removing his boots, he rolled up his trousers and joined her in the shallows, sighing as the cool water enveloped his feet. "I used to come here as a boy," he said, looking around the peaceful spot. "It was my refuge when chores became too much or father's expectations felt too heavy." "It's beautiful," Winifred agreed, watching how the dappled sunlight through the leaves played across the water's surface. "Peaceful." They stood in companionable silence for a while, simply enjoying the respite from the heat. When Winifred finally stepped out of the water, Victor offered his hand to steady her on the slippery rocks. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of their proximity, of his hand still holding hers, of the way his eyes had darkened as they met hers. "Winifred," he began, his voice low and uncertain. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then, somewhere upstream, a shout of laughter broke the spell. Victor released her hand and stepped back. "We should head back," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Maria will have supper ready soon." Winifred nodded, gathering her stockings and boots. As they walked back toward the ranch, she wondered what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted, and whether to be grateful for or disappointed by the timing. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Double H. Winifred was mucking out stalls in the barn when she heard the sound of an approaching buggy. Curious, she peered out to see a sleek black carriage pulling up to the main house, a smartly dressed man at the reins. Victor emerged from the house to greet the visitor, his stance stiff and unwelcoming. Winifred couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language spoke volumes, the visitor gesturing emphatically, Victor shaking his head firmly. After several minutes, the man climbed back into his carriage and departed, his expression thunderous. Victor remained on the porch, watching until the buggy disappeared from view. Later that evening, when Winifred brought the daily records to Victor's office for review, she found him distracted, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. "Is everything all right?" she asked carefully. He looked up, seeming to notice her presence for the first time. "Just business matters." "Nothing for you to worry about." "I see." She placed the ledger on his desk. "The records are up to date. We lost one calf to coyotes last night, but otherwise all is well." Victor nodded absently. "Thank you, Winifred." She turned to leave, sensing he needed solitude, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Have you ever had to choose between what's practical and what's right?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she answered honestly. "More than once. And how did you decide?" She considered her answer carefully. "I try to live so I can face myself in the mirror each morning. Sometimes that means making impractical choices." Victor studied her for a long moment. "That visitor today was Harrison Palmer, Mrs. Palmer's husband. He owns the bank in town." "I see," Winifred said, though she didn't fully understand the significance. "He wants to buy the Double H," Victor continued. "Offers a fair price, more than fair actually. Says I could move to San Francisco, live like a gentleman instead of breaking my back out here." Winifred's heart constricted at the thought of Victor leaving. "And what did you tell him?" "That the Double H isn't for sale." He picked up the whiskey glass but set it down without drinking. "My father built this place with his own hands. It's more than land and cattle, it's a legacy, a promise." "I understand," she said softly. His eyes met hers. "I thought you might." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Winifred wasn't brave enough to name. Finally, she broke the silence. "Good night, Victor." "Good night, Winifred." As summer waned, Winifred found herself settling deeper into life at the Double H. The work remained hard but satisfying, and she'd earned the respect of the ranch hands through consistent effort and quiet competence. Even Samuel, initially the most skeptical of her abilities, now sought her opinion on matters related to the horses. What she hadn't anticipated was how comfortable she would become around Victor. Their professional relationship had evolved into something warmer, a friendship marked by mutual respect and growing trust. They often worked side by side, conversations flowing easily between them, punctuated by moments of charged silence that neither seemed willing to acknowledge. One evening in early September, Winifred was returning to the bunkhouse after a late session of bookkeeping when she heard the soft notes of a guitar coming from the main house porch. Curious, she changed direction, finding Victor seated on the steps, his fingers moving skillfully across the strings. He looked up as she approached, but didn't stop playing. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, sad yet somehow hopeful. "I didn't know you played," she said when the song ended. "My mother taught me," he replied, his fingers idly stroking the worn wood of the instrument. "It was hers, one of the few things I have left of her. It's beautiful." She hesitated, then added, "Would you play something else?" Victor gestured to the step beside him. "Have a seat. Any requests?" Winifred settled on the step, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Whatever you'd like to share." He began another melody, this one more upbeat. As he played, he began to sing softly, a folk song about a cowboy and the open prairie. His voice was rich and surprisingly tender, the words painting pictures of starlit skies and freedom. When the song ended, they sat in comfortable silence, the night air cool around them, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "My father used to sing to my mother on evenings like this," Victor said finally. "She'd sit right where you are now and he'd serenade her until the stars came out. They must have loved each other very much." "They did." His fingers traced the edge of the guitar. "I was young when she died, but I remember how he looked at her like she hung the moon and stars." Winifred smiled at the image. "That's beautiful." It was. Victor set the guitar aside, turning slightly to face her. "I've always hoped to find that kind of love myself someday." The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Winifred's heart beat faster, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I should get some rest," she said finally, rising from the step. "Early start tomorrow." Victor stood as well. "Winifred." His voice stopped her as she turned to leave. "Thank you for listening. It's been a long time since I played for anyone. Thank you for sharing it with me." She smiled softly. "Good night, Victor. Good night." As she walked back to the bunkhouse, Winifred felt a curious mixture of warmth and apprehension. The connection growing between them was becoming harder to ignore and more dangerous to acknowledge. Her past remained a shadow between them, unspoken but ever present. Yet for the first time since arriving at the Double H, she found herself wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, there could be a future here after all. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the first hint that autumn was approaching. Winifred rose early, eager to complete her chores before the heat of the day set in. As she crossed the yard to the barn, she noticed an unfamiliar horse tied at the hitching post, a magnificent bay stallion with a military saddle. Inside the barn, she found Victor in conversation with a tall, uniformed man whose bearing spoke of authority. They fell silent as she entered, both turning to look at her. "Good morning," she said, nodding politely to both men. "Winifred." Victor's expression was unreadable. "This is Captain James Barrett of the U.S. Marshals. Captain, this is Miss Foster, one of my hands." The marshal tipped his hat. "Miss Foster." "Captain," she returned, fighting to keep her voice steady as fear coursed through her. "Why would a U.S. Marshal be at the Double H?" "The captain is looking for a fugitive," Victor explained, his eyes never leaving her face. A woman wanted in connection with a murder in St. Louis. Winifred felt the blood drain from her face. "I see," she managed, her mind racing. "I'll leave you to your business then." "Actually, Miss Foster," the marshal said, his voice deceptively casual, "perhaps you could help. The woman we're looking for might have come this way. She'd be about your age, possibly traveling under an assumed name. Been on the run about 3 months now." "I'm afraid I can't help you, Captain," she replied, proud of how steady her voice remained despite her racing heart. "I've been here at the Double H since spring, and we don't get many travelers passing through." The marshal studied her face for a long moment. "Well, if you do hear anything, be sure to let Mr. Hayward know. It's important we find her, of course." Victor's expression remained unreadable. "Winifred, would you mind checking on that mare in the north paddock, the one that was favoring her left foreleg yesterday?" The dismissal was clear. "Right away, Mr. Hayward." As she walked, not ran, though every instinct screamed at her to flee toward the paddock, Winifred's mind whirled with fear and desperate calculation. They were looking for her. Somehow they had traced her to Wyoming. Perhaps not to the Double H specifically, but close enough. She had to leave. Tonight, under cover of darkness. She had a little money saved from her wages, enough to get her somewhere new. Perhaps Oregon or California, somewhere she could lose herself among more people. The thought of leaving the Double H, of leaving Victor, sent a sharp pain through her chest. In the months she'd been here, this place had become home in a way no place had since her father's death. And Victor? Winifred pushed the thought away. There was no future for them, not with her past following so close behind. She went through her day mechanically, checking the mare, mucking stalls, avoiding the main house where the marshal might still be. When she returned to the bunkhouse for dinner, Diego informed her that Victor wanted to see her in his office after the meal. Fear churned in her stomach, killing her appetite. Had the marshal recognized her? Had Victor somehow discovered her true identity? When she knocked on his office door that evening, her hands were trembling slightly. "Come in," Victor called. He was seated behind his desk, papers spread before him, but his expression was troubled. "Close the door, please." Winifred did as requested, remaining standing near the entrance, ready to flee if necessary. "The marshal is gone," Victor said, watching her carefully. "He's staying in town for a few days, asking questions." "I see." She kept her voice neutral. "He's looking for a woman named Eleanor Wilkins." Victor's eyes never left her face. Accused of murdering her husband, a prominent businessman in St. Louis. Apparently she disappeared the night of his death, 3 months ago. Winifred said nothing, her heart hammering in her chest. "The interesting thing," Victor continued, "is that the marshal mentioned this woman might have scars on her back and shoulders. Evidence, he said, of years of abuse at the hands of her husband." Still, Winifred remained silent, though she felt color rising to her cheeks. Victor sighed, rising from his desk to pace to the window. "I told him I hadn't seen or heard of any such woman, that I'd let him know if I did." Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by confusion. "Why are you telling me this?" He turned to face her. "Because I need you to know that whatever brought you to the Double H, whatever you're running from, it doesn't change who you are to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "You don't know what you're saying," Winifred whispered. "Perhaps not," Victor agreed. "But I know what I've seen these past months. A woman of integrity, courage, and kindness. Someone who works harder than anyone I've ever known, who treats every creature with respect and gentleness." He took a step toward her. "I don't need to know your past to know your character, Winifred. Or whatever your real name might be." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I can't stay," she said softly. "It isn't safe for me or for you. Running again isn't the answer." Another step closer. "Let me help you. You can't, she insisted, though everything in her yearned to accept his offer. You don't understand what you'd be risking. Then help me understand. He was standing before her now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Trust me, Winifred, please. Something broke inside her, a dam holding back months of fear, loneliness, and desperate hope. My name is Eleanor, she whispered. Eleanor Wilkins. Though I haven't used that name since the night I fled St. Louis. Victor nodded, no surprise in his expression. Tell me what happened, Eleanor, and so she did. The words poured out of her, the arranged marriage to Gerald Wilkins, when she was just 18, her father dying shortly after. The gradual isolation from friends and family, the controlling behavior that evolved into violence. The years of abuse, hidden from the world by expensive clothes and her husband's respected position in society. That night, she said, her voice breaking, was different. Worse. He'd lost money in a business deal, been drinking heavily. He said he was going to teach me a final lesson. She shuddered at the memory. I believed him. I truly thought he would kill me. When he came at me, I just reacted, grabbed the fireplace poker and swung. I never meant to kill him, just to stop him. Victor's face had hardened as she spoke, his hands clenched at his sides. You were defending yourself. The law might not see it that way, Eleanor replied bitterly. Gerald had friends in high places, people who never saw beneath the respectable facade. To them, I'm just a wife who murdered her husband and fled. So you ran. She nodded. I took what money I had in my personal account and headed west. Changed my name, kept moving, eventually saw your advertisement for ranch hands. And came to the Double H, Victor finished. I never intended to stay this long, she admitted. Just long enough to earn more money, then move on. But then what? He prompted gently when she fell silent. Eleanor looked up at him, vulnerability plain on her face. Then I met you, and for the first time in years I felt safe. Victor's expression softened. You are safe here, Eleanor, I promise you that. You can't make that promise, she argued. Not with a marshal in town looking for me. I can and I do. His voice was firm. Barrett will find nothing here. No one on the Double H will betray you. And what happens when the next lawman comes? Or the next? Am I supposed to spend my life looking over my shoulder, putting you and everyone here at risk? Victor considered this for a moment. What if we could prove it was self-defense? Eleanor gave a bitter laugh. How? It's my word against a dead man's reputation. And I fled the scene, which hardly speaks to my innocence. There must be someone who knew what was happening. A servant, a neighbor, a doctor who treated your injuries. She hesitated. There was a housekeeper, Martha, she saw. More than most, and Dr. Collins treated me several times, though I always claimed clumsiness. That's a start. Victor's expression turned determined. If we could get statements from them, perhaps through a trusted attorney. Victor, Eleanor shook her head sadly. Why would you risk this? Risk everything you've built here. He stepped closer, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. Because some things are worth risking everything for. The tenderness in his touch, the certainty in his eyes, it undid her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as months of tension and fear began to release. I don't want to bring trouble to your door, she whispered. You didn't bring trouble, he corrected softly. Trouble found you through no fault of your own, and now, if you'll let me, I want to help you face it. His thumbs gently wiped away her tears. Eleanor, from the moment you arrived at the Double H, something in me recognized something in you. A strength, a resilience that called to my own. These past months, working beside you, talking with you, learning who you are, I've come to care for you in a way I never expected. Her breath caught in her throat. Victor, I'm not asking for promises, he continued. I'm only asking that you don't run. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Stay and let me help you fight this battle properly. Eleanor looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and determination. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." The relief on his face was palpable. For a moment, it seemed he might embrace her, but instead he stepped back, respecting her space. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together." That night, Eleanor returned to her room with a curious mixture of fear and hope. She'd never intended to tell anyone her true identity. Yet somehow, sharing it with Victor had lifted a weight she'd carried too long alone. The question now was whether his confidence was justified, or whether she'd just put them both in terrible danger. The next morning, Victor called her to his office before the day's work began. He looked as though he hadn't slept, but his eyes were clear and focused. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began without preamble. "I believe I know someone who can help a lawyer in Cheyenne who used to work with my father. He's discreet and has connections in the East." "Victor, I can't afford," he raised a hand to stop her. "Consider it an investment in a valued employee." His expression softened. "Please, Eleanor." "Let me do this." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "What do you need from me? Names, dates, any details you can remember that might help build your case." And he hesitated. "I need to see the evidence," she stiffened. "Evidence, your scars," he said gently. "If we're to prove abuse, they're the most compelling evidence we have." Eleanor's face flushed. I would never ask you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable," Victor assured her quickly. "But at some point, someone will need to document them. It doesn't have to be me." She looked away, shame and old pain burning in her chest. "They're ugly," she whispered. "No," Victor's voice was firm. "They're evidence of your strength, your survival. There is nothing about you that could ever be ugly to me." The conviction in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes. After a long moment, she nodded. "Not yet, but when the time comes, I'll do what's needed. That's all I ask." He reached across the desk, briefly touching her hand. "Now, let's begin with those names." For the next hour, they worked together. Eleanor recalling every detail she could of her life in St. Louis, people who might have suspected the abuse. Times when Gerald's mask of respectability had slipped in public. The financial transactions that had preceded their marriage. "Gerald needed my father's money," she explained. "His business was failing, though no one knew it then. Father was already ill and worried about my future. The marriage seemed like a good arrangement, security for me, capital for Gerald. And after your father died, everything changed. Gerald no longer needed to maintain the pretense of being a loving husband. The abuse started gradually, criticism, then control then." She trailed off, the memories still raw. Victor's expression darkened, but he kept his voice steady. "Did anyone else in St. Louis know of your whereabouts after you fled?" Eleanor shook her head. "I told no one, though." She paused, remembering. "Martha gave me money the night I left. She must have known I was planning to run, though I never said it directly." "Martha might be an ally then." "Someone willing to speak on your behalf." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed cautiously, "if she hasn't lost her position or been intimidated into silence." Victor made a note. "We'll proceed carefully. I'll write to James, my lawyer friend, today. In the meantime, the marshal is still in town, so you should stay close to the ranch." "Of course." She stood to leave. "Thank you, Victor, for believing me." His smile was gentle. "Always." The days that followed were tense but oddly peaceful. Eleanor continued her work on the ranch, finding comfort in the familiar routines. Victor rode into town several times, ostensibly on business but really to gauge the marshal's activities and send his letter to Cheyenne. "Barrett's asking questions," he reported one evening when they met in his office. "But no one's giving him anything useful. Most folks around here mind their own business." "How long will he stay?" Victor shrugged. "Hard to say, but he's covering a large territory, not just looking for you. He'll move on soon enough." A week later, his prediction proved correct. The marshal rode out of Yosemite, heading north toward the Montana Territory. The ranch breathed a collective sigh of relief, though only Victor and Eleanor knew the true reason for the tension. As September gave way to October, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. Harvest was complete, and preparations for winter began in earnest. Through it all, Eleanor and Victor worked side by side, their relationship deepening in ways neither had anticipated. They spoke often of her case, strategizing and planning, but they also shared quieter moments, evenings by the fire, stories of their childhoods, dreams for the future. Eleanor found herself looking forward to these moments with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. One crisp autumn evening, Victor invited her to ride with him to check the north pasture fencing. The air was cool but not cold, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber. They rode in companionable silence for a while, simply enjoying the beauty around them. "I love this time of year," Victor said finally, his breath visible in the cooling air. "Everything preparing for rest, for renewal." "It's beautiful," Eleanor agreed. "Though I confess I'm a bit anxious about my first Wyoming winter," he smiled. "It's harsh, but there's a strange beauty to it. And the spring that follows is all the sweeter for the wait." They crested a small rise, the valley spreading below them in a tapestry of autumn colors. Victor reined in his horse and Eleanor followed suit. "I had a letter from James yesterday," he said after a moment. "He's been making inquiries in St. Louis." Eleanor's heart quickened. "And he found Martha. She's working for another family now, but she remembered you, was concerned about what happened. Did she?" Eleanor hesitated. "Did she know about the abuse?" Victor nodded. "She suspected, at least. Said Gerald had a temper, especially when he drank. That she often heard arguments, saw bruises you tried to hide." Relief washed through Eleanor. Someone else had seen, had known. It wasn't just her word. "There's more," Victor continued. "James also spoke with Dr. Collins. Confidentially, of course. The doctor kept records of your visits, noted his suspicions of abuse, though you never confirmed them. He knew." Eleanor's voice broke slightly. "He never said anything. He claims he tried to ask if you needed help, but you denied anything was wrong. He didn't feel he could intervene without your cooperation." Eleanor remembered those visits, the careful questions, her equally careful deflections. Fear and shame had kept her silent, even when help was offered. "What happens now?" she asked. "James is building a case for self-defense. With Martha's testimony and the doctor's records, plus accounts of Gerald's business practices and temperament from others, he believes we have a strong argument." Hope fluttered in her chest, fragile but persistent. "Strong enough to clear my name, possibly. But it will mean going back, facing a trial or at least a hearing." Victor turned in his saddle to look at her directly. "It won't be easy, Eleanor." "Nothing worth doing ever is," she replied, summoning a small smile. His answering smile warmed her more than any fire could have. "No, it certainly isn't." They continued their ride, checking fences and discussing practical matters, but something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a strengthening of the bond that had been growing since her arrival. As they turned back toward the ranch, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Victor cleared his throat. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you." The seriousness in his tone made Eleanor glance over at him. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about the future. About what happens after we resolve your legal situation." Her pulse quickened. "Oh, you've become invaluable to the Double H, Eleanor. Your work with the horses, your help with the books, the ranch runs better with you here." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "But that's not why I want you to stay." They had reached a small stream, their horses stopping to drink. In the gathering twilight, Victor's expression was difficult to read. "Why then?" she asked softly. He dismounted and stepped closer to her horse, looking up at her with an openness that took her breath away. "Because in these past months, you've become essential not just to the ranch, but to me. My days are brighter for your presence, my burdens lighter when shared with you." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. Carefully, she dismounted as well, standing before him in the soft light of dusk. "Victor, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "I know there are obstacles to overcome, battles still to fight. But I wanted you to know that when the dust settles, there's a place for you here, with me, if you want it." Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of a joy so unexpected, so fragile she hardly dared acknowledge it. "I've been afraid to think of the future," she confessed. "For so long I've lived day to day, moment to moment. I understand." His hand reached up, tentatively touching her cheek. "But sometimes, Eleanor, hope is the bravest act of all." In the gathering darkness, with only the stars as witnesses, she allowed herself to lean into his touch. "Then I choose hope," she whispered. His smile was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss, a promise, a beginning. When they finally returned to the ranch, stars bright overhead and a new understanding between them, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in years. The quiet certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks that followed were filled with purpose and quiet joy. Eleanor continued her work at the ranch, now with the added sweetness of stolen moments with Victor, a touch of hands when passing tools, shared glances across the dinner table, occasional private walks in the evening. They were discreet, mindful of propriety and the gossip that might follow, but the ranch hands weren't blind. Eleanor noticed knowing looks exchanged, small smiles quickly hidden when she and Victor were together. Strangely, she felt no judgment from the men, only a quiet acceptance that somehow made the Double H feel even more like home. November brought the first serious snow, blanketing the land in pristine white. Work slowed but didn't stop. Animals still needed tending. Repairs still needed making. Eleanor found a strange beauty in the stark landscape, the mountains rising in sharp relief against the clear blue sky. One cold afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, making slow progress through the deep snow. Victor, who had been in the barn with Eleanor straightening tack, stepped outside to watch the approach. "Expecting someone?" she asked, joining him in the doorway. "No," he replied, his expression concerned. "Weather's too harsh for casual visits." As the rider drew closer, Victor's posture relaxed slightly. "It's James," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "From Cheyenne." Eleanor's heart rate increased. The lawyer had been corresponding regularly with Victor, but an in-person visit in this weather suggested significant news. "I'll put on coffee," she said, turning toward the house. "Eleanor." Victor caught her hand. "Whatever news he brings, we face it together. Remember that." She nodded, drawing strength from his steady gaze before heading to the main house. James Campbell proved to be a slight, keen-eyed man in his 50s, with intelligent eyes and a thoughtful manner. After warming himself by the fire and accepting coffee, he got straight to business. "I've been working diligently on your case, Mrs. Wilkins," he said, addressing Eleanor directly. "And I believe we've made significant progress." "What kind of progress?" Victor asked, seated beside Eleanor at the kitchen table. James removed several documents from his leather satchel. First, signed statements from both Martha Jenkins and Dr. Collins, attesting to their observations and suspicions of abuse. Second, evidence of Mr. Wilkins' financial improprieties prior to your marriage, essentially confirming that he married you for your father's money, not out of affection. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised by this confirmation. Most importantly, James continued, I've been in contact with the St. Louis prosecutor's office. After reviewing our evidence, they're willing to consider reducing the charges from murder to justifiable homicide in self-defense. Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest. What does that mean exactly? It means that instead of a murder trial, you would face a hearing before a judge. If the judge accepts our evidence and your testimony, all charges would be dropped. And if the judge doesn't accept it? Victor asked, his hand finding Eleanor's beneath the table. James's expression grew more serious. Then she would still face trial, though with a stronger defense than before. Eleanor took a deep breath. What would I need to do? Return to St. Louis, James said simply. Give your testimony, face questioning about the events of that night. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter weather. To return to St. Louis, to face the society that had turned a blind eye to her suffering, to relive that terrible night. When? Victor asked, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. After the winter, James replied. Travel would be too difficult now, and we can use the time to further strengthen our case. Eleanor nodded slowly. Spring, then? Yes. James gathered his papers. In the meantime, I recommend you continue as you have been. The marshal has moved on, and there's no indication anyone connects Miss Foster of the Double H with Mrs. Wilkins of St. Louis. After James had been shown to a guest room for the night, Eleanor and Victor sat alone by the fire in his study. Snow fell gently outside the windows, the world quiet and still. Are you all right? Victor asked softly. Eleanor stared into the flames. I'm terrified, she admitted, but also relieved in a way. The prospect of clearing my name, of no longer having to look over my shoulder, it's worth the fear. I'll be with you, Victor promised, every step of the way. She turned to him, heart full. I can't ask that of you. The ranch, Samuel can manage the ranch for a few weeks, Victor interrupted gently. This is more important. Why? She whispered. Why am I worth such risk to you? Victor took both her hands in his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. Because I love you, Eleanor. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, when you stood in my doorway, dusty from the road but with your chin held high and determination in your eyes. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't deserve such love. You deserve that and more, he countered, reaching up to brush away her tears. You deserve peace, safety, happiness. And if you'll let me, I want to spend my life ensuring you have all three. In that moment, with snow falling softly outside and firelight dancing across his beloved face, Eleanor made her choice. Leaning forward, she kissed him not tentatively like their first kiss, but with all the emotion she'd kept carefully contained for so long. I love you too, she whispered against his lips, more than I ever thought possible. His arms encircled her, holding her close as if she were something infinitely precious. In the warmth of his embrace, Eleanor finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps, after all the darkness, the light of a new beginning truly awaited. Winter settled over the Double H, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Work continued, albeit at a slower pace, with much of the activity centered around keeping the animals fed and ensuring pipes didn't freeze. Eleanor found herself spending more time in the main house, helping Maria with household tasks and assisting Victor with the ranch accounts. Their relationship deepened in this time of enforced closeness, conversations stretching late into the evening by the fire, learning the small details of each other's lives that daily work had left no time to discover. She learned that Victor had a surprising talent for wood carving, creating small, intricate animals in his rare moments of leisure. He discovered her love of poetry, particularly Whitman, whose verses she could recite from memory. Christmas came and went, a quiet celebration with the handful of hands who hadn't returned to their families for the holiday. Victor gave Eleanor a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For your new story," he explained softly. She gave him a hand-knitted scarf, crafted in secret during the long evenings. "To keep you warm when I can't," she teased, earning a kiss that left her breathless. January brought bitter cold and howling winds that made even short trips between buildings an ordeal. February wasn't much better, though the days gradually lengthened, promising that spring would eventually return. Through it all, letters arrived periodically from James, updating them on the case. More witnesses had been found, a former business partner of Gerald's who corroborated his violent temper, a neighbor who recalled hearing disturbing sounds from the Wilkins household. "He's building a strong case," Victor assured Eleanor one evening as they reviewed the latest letter. "By the time we reach St. Louis, the prosecutor may be ready to drop the charges entirely." "I hope so," she said, though doubt still lingered. "Gerald had powerful friends, and now so do you." Victor squeezed her hand. "James is well respected in legal circles, and he believes in your innocence." As March brought the first tentative signs of thaw, Eleanor found herself increasingly anxious about the journey ahead. Nightmares plagued her sleep, visions of Gerald alive again, of judges condemning her, of Victor turning away in disgust when he finally saw the full extent of her scars. It was after one such nightmare that she finally found the courage to show him. They had been sitting in his study, reviewing the next day's work assignments, when she suddenly set down her pen. "Victor," she began, her voice barely audible, "there's something I need to do before we go to St. Louis." He looked up, concern evident in his expression. "What is it?" "You said. You said someone would need to document my scars, as evidence." She took a deep breath. "I'd rather it be you than a stranger," understanding dawned in his eyes. "Eleanor, are you certain? It doesn't have to be now." "I'm certain." She rose from her chair. "I need to know. I need to see how you look at me afterward." Victor stood as well, moving to stand before her. "Nothing could change how I see you, Eleanor. Nothing." With trembling fingers, she began to unbutton the high collar of her blouse. "Turn around," she requested softly. "Please." He did as asked, giving her privacy as she removed her blouse and the light chemise beneath, leaving only a thin cotton camisole that left her back and shoulders exposed. The cool air raised goosebumps on her skin. "You can look now," she whispered. Victor turned slowly. She heard his sharp intake of breath, but couldn't bear to see his expression. Keeping her back to him, arms crossed protectively over her chest, she waited in agonizing silence. "Eleanor," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "May I come closer?" She nodded, unable to speak. His footsteps were soft on the wooden floor as he approached. She flinched involuntarily when his fingers touched her shoulder, so gently it was barely a whisper against her skin. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I won't hurt you." "I know," she managed. "It's just—" "No one has touched them since they were made." His hand stilled. "No doctor treated these," she shook her head. "Gerald wouldn't allow it, said they were a reminder of my place." A sound escaped him, then something between a growl and a sob. "What he did to you." His voice broke. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry you endured this." "Are they very ugly?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "No," Victor said firmly. "They're evidence of your courage, your will to survive." Slowly, reverently, his fingers traced one of the longer scars that curved from her shoulder blade to the middle of her back. "Each one of these is a battle you survived," he said softly. "Each one a testament to your strength." Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. "I was so ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Victor insisted, his voice fierce with conviction. "Nothing." Carefully, he placed a feather-light kiss on her shoulder, just above one of the worst scars. You are beautiful, Eleanor. Every inch of you, marked or unmarked, beautiful and brave and so very loved. A sob escaped her, then not of pain or sorrow, but of release. Years of shame and self-hatred began to dissolve under the tender touch of the man who loved her not despite her scars, but with full knowledge of them. Victor gently turned her to face him, his eyes shining with unshed tears and a love so profound it took her breath away. "Those days are over now," he promised, echoing words he'd never actually spoken but had demonstrated every day since her arrival. "No one will ever hurt you like that again. Not while I draw breath." "I believe you," she whispered, and realized it was true. For the first time since Gerald's reign of terror had begun, she felt truly safe, not just physically, but in the deepest part of her soul. Victor carefully retrieved her chemise and blouse, helping her dress with a tenderness that spoke volumes. When she was clothed again, he took her hands in his. "When we return from St. Louis," he said solemnly, "when your name is cleared and the past is truly behind you, I want to ask you something important." Eleanor's heart quickened. "You could ask me now," he smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Some questions deserve their proper time. But know this, whatever the future holds, my heart is yours, Eleanor, completely and irrevocably yours." "And mine is yours," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. Come what may. April arrived with warming temperatures and the first green shoots pushing through the soil. The ranch came alive with spring activities, fence mending, early planting, and preparations for calving season. Through it all, Eleanor and Victor worked side by side, their love a quiet constant that sustained them through long days and uncertain futures. The ranch hands observed the change in their relationship with knowing smiles but respectful distance, while Maria took to setting an extra place at the dinner table in the main house without comment. By mid-April, the roads were clear enough for travel. James wrote that the hearing had been scheduled for May 10th, less than a month away. Preparations began in earnest, with Samuel officially named temporary foreman during Victor's absence. "We'll leave next week," Victor told Eleanor one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and pink. "Take the train from Cheyenne. James will meet us in St. Louis." Eleanor nodded, her stomach clenching with anxiety. "I never thought I'd return," she admitted. "Part of me still doesn't want to, I know." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "But facing this is the only way to truly be free." "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Not just of the hearing, but of being back there, seeing those places again." "You won't be alone," Victor reminded her. Not for a moment. The night before their departure, a spring storm swept across the ranch, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the valley. Eleanor stood at the window of her small room in the bunkhouse, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. A knock at her door startled her. Opening it, she found Victor standing there, rain-drenched and slightly breathless. "Is something wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. "No, nothing's wrong." He shook his head, droplets of water flying from his hair. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about tomorrow, about what lies ahead." She stepped back, inviting him in. "I've been doing the same." Victor entered, removing his wet hat but remaining near the door. "I know we agreed to wait until after St. Louis to discuss the future," he began, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. "But I find I can't wait any longer." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Victor." "I had planned something more romantic," he said with a rueful smile, gesturing at his sodden appearance. "But perhaps this is fitting. We've never had an easy or conventional path." To her astonishment, he dropped to one knee before her, taking her hand in his. "Eleanor Wilkins, I love you." Your strength, your kindness, your courage, everything about you has captured my heart completely. Whatever challenges tomorrow brings, I want to face them with you as my wife, not just my companion." Tears sprang to her eyes as he continued. "I'm asking you now, before we leave this place that has become our home, before we face the ghosts of your past, will you marry me? Will you build a new life with me here at the Double H, create new memories to replace the painful ones?" "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. "Yes, Victor. I will marry you." Joy transformed his face. Rising, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his devotion. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "Plan to get one in Cheyenne on our way through." "I don't need a ring," Eleanor assured him. "Just your heart. You have that," he promised. "Always." The journey to St. Louis took nearly a week, the landscape outside the train windows transforming from the rugged mountains of Wyoming to the rolling hills of Nebraska, and finally to the lush river valleys of Missouri. With each mile, Eleanor felt both dread and determination building within her. Victor remained a constant source of strength, his hand often finding hers as they shared a private compartment, his eyes conveying what words couldn't, that she was not alone, that whatever awaited them in St. Louis, they would face it together. James met them at the station, his expression cautiously optimistic. "The prosecutor is increasingly amenable to our arguments," he informed them as they rode in a carriage to the hotel. "The evidence of abuse is compelling, and Mr. Wilkins' reputation has suffered somewhat since his death. Several business improprieties have come to light." "That helps our case?" Eleanor asked. "It establishes character," James explained. "A man capable of dishonesty in business might well be capable of violence at home." The hotel James had arranged was modest but comfortable, located in a quieter part of the city, away from the society circles Eleanor had once frequented. Still, being back in St. Louis brought a flood of memories, some painful, some bittersweet. "My father's house was near here," she told Victor as they settled into their adjoining rooms. "Just 3 blocks east. It's strange to be so close yet unable to go home." "Perhaps someday you can," Victor suggested gently. "When this is all over," Eleanor shook her head. "No, my home is the Double H now, with you." The days leading up to the hearing were filled with preparation. Eleanor met repeatedly with James, rehearsing her testimony, reviewing the evidence, preparing for the prosecutor's questions. "Be honest, be direct," James advised. "Your sincerity is your greatest asset. Judge Wilson is fair-minded and not easily swayed by social standing." The night before the hearing, Eleanor could barely eat, her stomach tight with anxiety. Victor convinced her to take a short walk after dinner, the spring evening mild and fragrant with blooming trees. "Tomorrow, whatever happens, remember that you did nothing wrong," he said as they strolled arm in arm through a small park. "You survived, Eleanor. That's not a crime." "I know that here," she replied, touching her heart. "But knowing it and having a judge believe it are different things." "Trust in the truth," Victor encouraged. "It has a way of making itself known." The courtroom the next morning was smaller than Eleanor had feared, with only a few spectators present, mostly legal clerks and a reporter or two. She sat beside James at the defense table, Victor directly behind her in the first row of seats. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with silver hair and penetrating eyes, called the hearing to order promptly at 9. The prosecutor, Mr. Reynolds, presented the basic facts of the case. Gerald Wilkins found dead in his study, his wife missing, evidence of a struggle. The state initially charged Mrs. Wilkins with murder, Reynolds concluded. However, in light of new evidence, we are amenable to considering the possibility of self-defense, depending on the testimony presented today. James called his witnesses first. Martha, the former housekeeper, described finding Eleanor injured multiple times, hearing arguments that turned violent, seeing Gerald's explosive temper firsthand. Dr. Collins testified to treating Eleanor for injuries consistent with abuse, though she had never admitted their true cause. Gerald's former business partner spoke of his volatile temperament, his financial desperation prior to marrying Eleanor, and his controlling nature. A neighbor reluctantly admitted to hearing disturbing sounds from the Wilkins home on multiple occasions, including the night of Gerald's death. Throughout it all, Eleanor sat straight-backed and still, Victor's supportive presence a tangible comfort behind her. When it was finally her turn to testify, she approached the witness stand with trembling legs but a steady resolve. After being sworn in, she faced the judge directly. "Your Honor, I did not intend to kill my husband that night," she began, her voice clear despite her fear. "I only wanted to stop him from killing me." With quiet dignity, Eleanor recounted her marriage, the gradual isolation, the escalating abuse, the fear that had become her constant companion. She described the events of that final night in detail: Gerald's rage over a failed business deal, his threats, the moment when she truly believed her life was in danger. "He said I would never leave the house alive," she testified, her voice breaking slightly. "That he would finally fix me permanently. When he came at me, I grabbed the fireplace poker. I just wanted to create enough space to escape, but he lunged and—" She took a deep breath. "The poker connected with his head. He fell and there was so much blood." "Why did you flee?" the prosecutor asked during cross-examination. If it was truly self-defense, why not stay and explain? "Because no one had ever believed me before," Eleanor answered honestly. "Not when I tried to hint at the abuse, not when I showed up with bruises I couldn't explain. Gerald was respected, powerful. I was just his wife. I was terrified that no one would believe me about that night either." After nearly 3 hours of testimony, Judge Wilson called a recess to consider the evidence. Eleanor returned to her seat, emotionally drained but relieved to have spoken her truth at last. "You did wonderfully," Victor murmured, briefly taking her hand. The judge was listening, truly listening. When court reconvened an hour later, Judge Wilson's expression was grave but not unkind. "This court has heard compelling testimony regarding the circumstances of Gerald Wilkins' death," he began. "The evidence of long-term abuse is substantial and credible. The medical examiner's report is consistent with Mrs. Wilkins' account of the events of that night." Eleanor held her breath, her hand finding Victor's behind her. It is the finding of this court that Eleanor Wilkins acted in reasonable fear for her life. The charge of murder is hereby dismissed. Mrs. Wilkins, you are free to go." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the courtroom. Free. After months of running, of looking over her shoulder, of fearing every knock at the door, she was free. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Victor, whose own eyes shone with emotion. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "Yes," he agreed, pulling her into his arms, propriety forgotten in the moment of triumph. "Now we can truly begin." They left the courtroom hand in hand, stepping out into the bright May sunshine. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling as though she were breathing freely for the first time in years. "What would you like to do now?" Victor asked gently. "We could stay a few days, visit your father's grave perhaps." Eleanor considered this, then shook her head. "No, there's nothing for me here anymore. I want to go home, Victor, to our home." His smile was radiant. "Then home we shall go." The journey back to Wyoming felt entirely different from the tense trip east. With each mile, Eleanor felt lighter, the burden of her past finally lifting. They spent the long train ride making plans for the ranch, for their wedding, for the future they would build together. "I'd like a small ceremony," Eleanor decided as they crossed into Nebraska. "Just the ranch hands, Maria, maybe a few friends from town." "Whatever you wish," Victor agreed, his hand warm around hers. "Though I warn you, Maria will insist on a proper celebration afterward." "I can live with that," she laughed, the sound so free and joyous it surprised even her. They arrived back at the Double H in early June, the ranch lush and green with late spring growth. Samuel and the hands greeted them with obvious relief and barely concealed curiosity. "Good news?" Samuel asked gruffly as they descended from the wagon. Victor looked to Eleanor, letting her choose how much to share. She stepped forward, standing tall in the afternoon sunlight. "The best news," she said simply. "I'm free to begin a new life, here with all of you." A cheer went up from the assembled hands, Diego rushing forward to pump Victor's hand while Maria embraced Eleanor warmly. "I knew it," the older woman whispered. "I knew you belonged here." That evening, after a celebratory dinner during which Victor formally announced their engagement to enthusiastic approval, they walked together to the creek, where they had shared so many important moments. The air was sweet with wildflowers, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Victor led her to a large boulder overlooking the water, helping her to sit before joining her. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. From a small velvet pouch, he withdrew a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "Father gave it to me before he died, said it should go to the woman who captured my heart as completely as my mother captured his." "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, tears threatening again. "I'll treasure it always." "I want to build a life with you that's as beautiful as this land," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "A life where those scars can truly heal, where new memories replace the painful ones." "We already have begun," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape. "Every day since I came to work your ranch." Victor's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "Do you remember what I said when I first saw your scars?" he asked softly. Eleanor nodded against his shoulder. "You said those days are over now." "And they are," he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "From this day forward, there will only be love, respect, and the home we build together." As darkness fell and stars appeared one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Eleanor Wilkins, soon to be Eleanor Hayward, knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. Not just a place on a map, but a place in the world, in a community, in the heart of a man who saw her scars not as flaws but as testaments to her strength. "I love you, Victor Hayward," she whispered, turning to meet his gaze in the gathering twilight. "And I love you, Eleanor," he replied, his voice a promise as eternal as the mountains surrounding them. "Now and always." 3 weeks later, on a perfect summer morning, they were married beneath an arch of wildflowers in the meadow near the creek. Eleanor wore a simple white dress with the wooden comb Victor had given her securing her veil. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, Maria dabbing at her eyes throughout the ceremony, while Samuel surprised everyone by producing a fiddle for the celebration afterward. They danced under open skies, surrounded by the people who had become family, on the land that had offered Eleanor sanctuary when she needed it most. As the sun set on their wedding day, Victor led his bride to the main house, their house now, where he paused at the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayward," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the doorway. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his neck, heart full to overflowing with joy. "I am home," she whispered. "I've been home since the day I found you." And as he carried her into their new life together, Eleanor knew that the scars of her past would always be part of her story, but they would no longer define it. From this day forward, her life would be defined by love, by the family they would create together, by the legacy they would build on this land that had offered her a second chance. Those days of fear and pain were truly over. In their place stretched an endless horizon of possibility, as vast and beautiful as the Wyoming sky.